The crystal spires of Cirilla Prime glittered in the twin suns' light, their translucent facets refracting rainbows across the Scholars' Promenade. Ambassador Lyra Navan paused at the viewport of the High Council chamber, allowing herself a moment to absorb the beauty of her homeworld. The ancient city of Luminara spread before her, a masterpiece of art and science intertwined, where knowledge towers soared alongside botanical gardens, and citizens moved with the unhurried grace of those who had never known true war. That serenity would soon end. "Ambassador, the transmission array is prepared," said Captain Joran Tal, his voice tight with uncharacteristic tension. The former pilot stood ramrod straight, his ceremonial uniform a reminder of Cirilla's token military, an organization that had served as little more than an honor guard for millennia. Lyra nodded, smoothing the formal diplomatic robes that suddenly felt too heavy, too ornate for the grim task ahead. "And the council?" "They've approved the final wording, though Councillor Varen still objects to the tone." A bitter smile crossed Lyra's face. Varen would object to calling a fire hot if it contradicted protocol. She stepped away from the window and toward the communication hub at the chamber's center. "We've no time for diplomatic niceties. Not anymore." The hub's holographic display flickered with static as technicians made final adjustments. This would be the most powerful transmission ever sent from Cirilla Prime, a desperate plea hurled across the stars toward the only world that might help them: Earth. Humans, Deathworlders. The term had once been academic to Cerilans, a classification for species evolved on planets with extreme conditions: high gravity, aggressive predators, and volatile weather. Earth was categorized as a Class 9 Deathworld, producing organisms with redundant biological systems, remarkable endurance, and a capacity for violence that most Cerilans found difficult to comprehend. Yet in their century of limited contact, humans had shown themselves to be more than their fearsome reputation, capable of art, philosophy, and surprising gentleness. They maintained a modest colony in the outer reaches of the Cerilan system, mostly scientists and cultural exchange personnel. Their military presence in the sector was rumored to be substantial, though kept discreetly at a distance out of respect for Cerilan sensibilities. Now, Lyra hoped those rumors were true. "Transmission ready, Ambassador," said the chief technician, her fingers trembling slightly over the controls. Lyra squared her shoulders and stepped onto the transmission platform. The recording light blinked on, and she looked directly into the lens, imagining the human faces that might eventually receive her message. "This is Ambassador Lyra Navan of Cirilla Prime, transmitting an urgent plea to Earth Command and all human vessels within range. Our long-range sensors have detected a massive fleet approaching our system, vessels bearing markings consistent with the Draknir hegemony." She paused, maintaining the composure that had served her through decades of diplomatic service. "The Draknir have ignored all attempts at communication and have disabled our outer system warning beacons. Their approach vector and formation indicate hostile intent. Cirilla Prime has no significant military assets with which to defend itself." Another pause, this one less controlled as emotion threatened to overtake her. "In accordance with the spirit of mutual aid clause in our cultural exchange treaty, I formally request immediate military assistance from Earth forces. Our intelligence suggests we have less than 48 standard hours before the Draknir fleet reaches orbital range. Without intervention, we face—" A sudden, blinding flash illuminated the chamber, so bright that the transmission equipment automatically dimmed its intake. Lyra's words died in her throat as the distant thunder of something inconceivably powerful shook the council building to its foundations. "What was that?" she demanded, stepping off the platform. Joran was already at the sensor console, his face ashen. "Multiple hyperspace signatures, massive ones. They're already here." "That's impossible. The projections gave us 2 days." The projections were wrong. The technicians scrambled to recalibrate the transmission equipment as the building trembled again. Outside the viewport, The perfect sky of Cyrilla Prime was marred by dozens of ominous dark shapes descending through the atmosphere. "Finish the transmission!" Lyra ordered, rushing back to the platform. The recording light still blinked, though the signal strength indicator fluctuated wildly. "Earth Command. The Draknir fleet has arrived ahead of schedule. They've already begun orbital bombardment. I repeat, we need immediate." The transmission hub exploded in a shower of sparks and crystalline shards. Lyra was thrown backward, her diplomatic robe smoking from the discharge. Joran rushed to her side, helping her to her feet as emergency systems engaged, bathing the chamber in pulsing amber light. "Did it transmit?" she asked, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. "Did the message get through?" Joran looked to the chief technician, who was frantically working the remaining controls. "Partial transmission," the technician reported. "I can't confirm receipt." Through the viewport, Lyra watched in horror as the first of the Draknir warships descended through Cyrilla's atmosphere. Massive, blade-shaped vessels, bristling with weapons unlike anything she had studied in her diplomatic briefings. In the distance, the first of Luminara's knowledge towers collapsed in slow motion, its crystalline structure dissolving into glittering dust. "Sound the planetary evacuation," she said, her voice hollow but firm. "All available ships, priority to children, scholars, and cultural repositories." Joran hesitated. "Ambassador, our evacuation fleet is designed for natural disasters, not—" "I know what our ships were designed for, Captain." Her eyes remained fixed on the destruction unfolding beyond the window. "But they're all we have now." As the council chamber emptied around them, Lyra remained at the viewport, watching as her beautiful world began to burn. The distress call to Earth was their only hope, a desperate gambit that their Deathworlder allies would come to their rescue. She didn't yet know that the message had indeed been received, but tragically misunderstood. The central evacuation hub of Luminara had never been designed to accommodate a panicked exodus. Its soaring architecture and meandering pathways, once celebrated for encouraging contemplation and discourse, now created bottlenecks where terrified Ceruleans clustered, their scholarly composure shattered by the sounds of distant explosions. Lyra moved through the crowd, her singed diplomatic robes abandoned for the practical jumpsuit of emergency services. A makeshift command center had been established in what was once a botanical exhibition hall. Holographic displays showing the grim progress of the Draknir invasion. "The agricultural dome in the southern quadrant has been hit," reported a young coordinator, her voice cracking. "Atmospheric integrity compromised." "Redirect evacuation vessels from the eastern spaceport," Lyra ordered. "How many ships do we have left?" Joran approached, carrying a portable tactical display. His formal uniform was gone too, replaced by the simple gray of a pilot. 37 vessels still operational. We've loaded 16 to capacity and launched them toward the neutral systems. Another 8 are being loaded now." "And the Draknir fleet?" His expression darkened. "They've established a blockade at the system's edge, but they're letting our evacuation ships through." "Letting them through?" Lyra's brow furrowed. "Why would they?" "Because they don't consider us a threat," said a new voice. Dr. Aaron Merrick limped into the command center, his lab coat stained with soot and what looked disturbingly like blood. The venerable physicist had been directing the evacuation of the Central Academy when it took a direct hit. "They're here to destroy our world, not our people. Witnesses are useful for spreading terror." The brutal assessment hung in the air. Lyra had known Aaron for decades, a brilliant mind dedicated to theoretical energy studies. To hear him speak of terror and destruction rather than equations was yet another indication of how fundamentally their world had changed in mere hours. "We need to buy more time for the evacuation," Lyra said, turning back to the tactical display. "What about the orbital defense satellites?" "Destroyed in the first wave," Joran replied. "They were primarily monitoring stations, never meant for actual defense." Lyra's fist came down on the display table. There must be something we can use. We're a planet of scholars and engineers. Surely we can improvise? Dr. Aaron stepped forward. Studying the display with the same intense concentration he usually reserved for complex formulae. The atmospheric research stations, he said suddenly. They generate powerful electromagnetic fields for studying upper atmospheric phenomena. Could they be repurposed? Lyra asked. Not as weapons, Aaron clarified. But if we recalibrate them to a specific frequency, we might be able to create a localized disruption field that would interfere with their targeting systems, at least temporarily. Hope, thin and fragile, flickered in Lyra's chest. How many stations would we need? At least 5, positioned strategically around Luminara, and we'd need to coordinate them precisely. Joran was already pulling up the locations on the tactical display. Most of the stations are automated. We'd need to send teams to manually override them. Do it, Lyra ordered. Assemble volunteers with the necessary technical expertise. As Joran moved to comply, a young communications officer approached hesitantly. Ambassador, we've received a partial transmission. It appears to be from Earth. Lyra's heart leapt. Put it through! The holographic display flickered, showing only fragments of a message. A human face, stern, wearing what appeared to be a military uniform, spoke in disjointed segments. Received your transmission. Confirm hostile forces. Standard evacuation protocols. Misidentified as threat beacon. Full battle group deployed. Extreme prejudice. No survivors. The message dissolved into static. The command center fell silent as the implications sank in. They think we're the threat, Lyra whispered, horror dawning. They've misinterpreted our distress signal as some kind of warning about us. Or the Draknir intercepted and altered our transmission, Joran suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. Dr. Aaron shook his head slowly. Whatever the case, it appears Earth is sending forces, not to save us, but to ensure the job is finished. Outside, the sky glowed orange with fires that had once been libraries and universities. The distinctive shriek of Draknir drop pods could be heard, signaling the arrival of ground forces. Lyra straightened her spine, pushing aside the crushing weight of this new revelation. We proceed with the plan. Redirect the remaining evacuation ships to the secondary spaceports and continue loading civilians. Captain Tal, assemble your teams for the atmospheric stations. And you, Ambassador? Joran asked. Lyra's gaze hardened as she watched another distant explosion bloom on the horizon. I'm going to the Central Communications Array. If Earth is coming to annihilate us based on a misunderstanding, I need to try to correct it before they arrive. Dr. Aaron stepped forward. I'll accompany you. The array's systems will need significant reconfiguration to break through the Draknir jamming fields. Lyra nodded gratefully. Captain, how long until those atmospheric disruptors are operational? Joran checked his calculations. 4 hours, if we move quickly. Then we have 4 hours to change the course of 2 worlds, Lyra said. Let's not waste a moment. The journey to the Central Communications Array traversed a Sci-Fi Prime that Lyra barely recognized. Streets that had once hosted philosophical debates and artistic performances were now littered with debris and abandoned personal effects. The elegant architecture that had defined Luminara for centuries bore the scars of weapons never before seen on this peaceful world. Their transport, a research vehicle hastily repurposed, wound through back streets and service corridors, avoiding the main thoroughfares where Draknir ground forces had been spotted. Dr. Aaron worked furiously on a portable console, pre-programming the modifications they would need to implement at the array. Their jamming technology is sophisticated, he muttered, more to himself than to Lyra. But it follows predictable harmonic patterns. If we can identify the base frequency and generate a countersignal. Lyra let him work, her attention divided between his technical muttering and the devastation outside. A group of Saralan civilians huddled in the ruins of what had been a music conservatory, being directed toward evacuation points by volunteers in emergency jumpsuits. The sight simultaneously broke her heart and strengthened her resolve. "We're approaching the array," said their driver, a young engineer who had volunteered despite the obvious danger. "But there's a problem." Lyra leaned forward to see through the transport's viewport. The communications array, a sweeping structure of interlocking dishes and signal boosters, appeared intact. But surrounding it was a contingent of figures that sent ice through her veins. Draknir ground troops. Even from a distance, they were terrifying, towering bipedal forms encased in articulated armor that enhanced their already formidable physiology. The Draknir were another Deathworld species, evolved on a planet even harsher than Earth, with a culture built entirely around conquest, where humans had developed a complex society with both martial and peaceful aspects. The Draknir had channeled all their evolutionary advantages toward a single purpose: domination. "Stop here," Lyra ordered. The transport pulled into the shadow of a collapsed pedestrian bridge, out of sight of the Draknir patrol. "We need another way in," she said, studying the array complex. "Are there maintenance tunnels?" The engineer nodded. "A network of service conduits runs beneath the entire district. They connect to the array's lower levels." "Show us." They abandoned the transport, proceeding on foot to a nondescript access point, half hidden in the rubble of a fallen statue. The engineer worked the controls, and a section of pavement slid aside, revealing a dimly lit passage downward. "These tunnels were designed for maintenance drones," the engineer warned. "They'll be cramped for us." "Better cramped than dead," Dr. Aaron remarked dryly as he gathered his equipment. The tunnels were indeed claustrophobic, barely high enough for them to proceed in a crouch. Their progress slowed by the need to navigate around power conduits and data junctions. The air was stale and carried the acrid smell of burned circuitry. Why would the Draknir secure the array? Lyra wondered aloud as they crawled through the narrow space. "They've destroyed most of our other communication infrastructure." "Because it's the only facility powerful enough to reach beyond our system," Dr. Aaron replied. "They want to ensure we can't call for help or warn others." The implication hung heavily between them. The Draknir weren't just attacking Cirilla Prime. They were systematically eliminating the planet's ability to communicate its fate to the wider galaxy. After what felt like hours but was likely only 40 minutes, they reached an access panel that, according to their guide, would open into the array's main control room. "Wait," Lyra whispered, pressing her ear to the panel. The faint sound of movement came from beyond, the heavy tread of armored boots. "They're inside the control room," she breathed. Dr. Aaron's expression tightened. "We need a diversion." The engineer hesitated only briefly before speaking. "There's a secondary power junction 2 sections back. If I overload it, it should create enough of a disturbance to draw them out." "That's too dangerous," Lyra protested. "The entire planet is too dangerous now." "Ambassador," the engineer replied with a sad smile. "Let me do this. I've got family on one of the evacuation ships." After a moment of internal struggle, Lyra nodded. The engineer slipped back the way they had come, leaving Lyra and Dr. Aaron crouched in the dimness, waiting. 3 tense minutes passed before a distant explosion shook the tunnel, sending cascades of dust raining down on them. Alarm klaxons began to wail, and the heavy footsteps beyond the panel quickened, then receded. "Now," Lyra urged, and Dr. Aaron worked the manual release for the access panel. They emerged into the control room, a circular chamber dominated by a central console surrounded by monitoring stations. Through the reinforced windows, the array's massive dishes were visible, currently pointed downward in their offline position. Dr. Aaron moved immediately to the main console, his fingers flying over the controls. "The system's intact but locked down. Give me a few minutes to bypass the security protocols." Lyra took up position by the door, listening for returning Draknir troops. We may not have a few minutes. How's the message coming? I've prepared it, but without access to the transmission systems, it's useless. Aaron didn't look up from his work, his concentration absolute. And we'll only get one chance at this. Once we start broadcasting, they'll pinpoint our location immediately. A moment later, the console illuminated, bathing Aaron's face in blue light. I'm in, beginning system recalibration to counter the jamming field. Lyra joined him at the console, watching as he implemented the modifications he'd prepared during their journey. Outside, the massive dishes began to move, realigning themselves toward the stars. The message is loaded, he announced. But there's a problem. The targeting system is damaged. We can't pinpoint Earth specifically. We'll have to broadcast on all frequencies and hope it reaches them. Do it, Lyra ordered. Dr. Aaron activated the transmission sequence. The console hummed with power as the array channeled energy into a signal powerful enough to punch through the Draknir jamming field. Lyra stepped before the recording node, gathering her thoughts. This might be her final chance to avert the dual catastrophe bearing down on her world. The Draknir already here, and the humans potentially on their way to finish what the Draknir had started. The recording light blinked on, and she spoke with all the clarity and conviction she could muster. This is Ambassador Lyra Navan of Sci-Fi Prime, with an urgent clarification to all Earth forces. Our previous transmission has been misinterpreted. Sci-Fi Prime is under attack by Draknir forces. I repeat, Sci-Fi Prime is the victim, not the aggressor. We are a peaceful world with minimal defenses. Our population is being evacuated, but thousands remain stranded. She paused, fighting to keep her voice steady. If Earth forces are indeed inbound, I implore you to verify the situation before taking hostile action. The Draknir are the common enemy here. They have attacked without provocation or warning. Please, redirect any military response toward the Draknir fleet, not the remaining Cerulean settlements. A warning light flashed on the console. Dr. Aaron's expression grew grim. They've detected the transmission. We have less than 2 minutes before they can triangulate our position. Lyra nodded, turning back to the recording node for one final plea. This may be our last transmission. If there is any hope for Sci-Fi Prime, it lies with those who would stand against unprovoked aggression. We are scholars, not warriors. But today, we fight for our very existence. To Earth, to any civilized worlds receiving this message, bear witness to what happens here. And if you can help, please hurry. The transmission ended, just as the distant sound of Draknir troops reached them, the heavy, rhythmic footfalls of armored soldiers returning at speed. Did it transmit? Lyra asked anxiously. Dr. Aaron checked the console readouts. Signal confirmed. Whether anyone receives it. He shrugged helplessly. Then we've done what we came to do. Lyra moved toward the access panel through which they had entered. We need to get back to the evacuation hub. Before they could reach it, the main door to the control room burst inward with a shower of metal and sparks. 2 Draknir soldiers stormed through, their armor gleaming in the emergency lights, weapons raised. Lyra froze, facing an enemy at close range for the first time. The Draknir were even more imposing than they had appeared from a distance, nearly 2.5 meters tall, their armor accentuating the natural plates and spines of their physiology. The faceplates of their helmets were opaque, giving no hint of the beings within. Dr. Aaron stepped in front of Lyra, his slender frame absurdly vulnerable before the armored giants. One of the Draknir barked a command in their guttural language, gesturing with its weapon. They want us to surrender, Lyra translated, her diplomatic training automatically processing the hostile language. And if we refuse? Aaron asked quietly. The answer came in the form of an energy pulse that struck the console beside them, melting it into slag. I don't think refusal is an option, Lyra murmured. Raising her hands slowly, she addressed the Draknir in their own language. We submit to your authority and request proper treatment as non-combatants under the galactic conventions. A harsh sound emerged from the lead Draknir's helmet. Something that might have been laughter. It spoke again, this time in accented but understandable standard. Galactic conventions apply to recognized powers. Sci-Fi Prime is being erased. There will be no one to submit complaints on your behalf. It gestured with its weapon again, herding them toward the door. Lyra and Dr. Aaron exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. They would go with the Draknir for now. Survival meant the possibility of escape, of rejoining the evacuation efforts, of living to fight another day. As they were marched from the control room, Lyra cast one last look at the communication array visible through the windows. Their message was racing outward through space, their desperate plea arcing toward Earth and any other worlds that might be listening. Whether anyone would hear it or heed it remained to be seen. The Draknir transport rumbled through the devastated streets of Luminara, its armored hull scraping against debris that had once been architectural marvels. Inside its holding compartment, Lyra and Dr. Aaron sat in tense silence, monitoring their captors and their surroundings through narrow viewport slits. "They're taking us toward the central citadel," Lyra observed quietly. "That's where the evacuation command center is located." Dr. Aaron nodded grimly. They must have identified it as a nexus of resistance. The transport lurched suddenly, throwing them against the restraining barriers. Outside, the sounds of energy weapons and explosions intensified. "Something's happening." Lyra pressed her face to the viewport. "I think we're under attack." The transport halted abruptly. Commands were shouted in the Draknir language, followed by the heavy footfalls of soldiers deploying. Their guards hesitated, clearly torn between maintaining watch over their prisoners and joining the defense. The decision was made for them when something massive struck the transport, tilting it onto its side. Lyra and Dr. Aaron were thrown across the compartment, restraints snapping under the impact. The guards lost their footing, one of them crashing heavily into the compartment wall. "Now!" Lyra shouted, scrambling toward the disoriented guard. With strength, born of desperation, she wrenched the stunner from its holster and activated it against the guard's neck joint, one of the few vulnerable points in Draknir armor she had noted during her diplomatic briefings. The guard convulsed and collapsed. The second guard regained its footing and lunged toward her. But Dr. Aaron had seized a broken restraint bar and swung it with surprising force, catching the Draknir in what passed for its knee joint. As it staggered, Lyra applied the stunner again, and the second guard joined the first in unconsciousness. "I never imagined I'd be assaulting anyone, let alone Draknir shock troops," Dr. Aaron panted, leaning heavily against the tilted wall of the transport. "Consider it practical application of your theoretical knowledge," Lyra replied, already working at the emergency release for the compartment door. Physics in action. The door grudgingly slid aside, allowing them to clamber out into chaos. The transport had been disabled by what appeared to be an improvised explosive device, likely the work of desperate Cerulean defenders. Around them, a firefight raged between Draknir troops and a motley collection of Ceruleans, using a bizarre array of repurposed equipment as weapons. "Ambassador!" a familiar voice called from behind a barricade of fallen masonry. Captain Joran Tal waved them toward cover, firing what looked like a modified atmospheric sampling tool that now projected concentrated energy pulses. Lyra and Aaron sprinted for the barricade, energy blast from Draknir weapons scorching the ground at their heels. They tumbled into relative safety, gasping for breath. "Your timing is impeccable, Captain," Lyra managed between gulps of air. "We intercepted Draknir communications about high-value prisoners," Joran explained, continuing to fire over the barricade. "When we realized it might be you," he shrugged. "We improvised." Lyra took in the makeshift defenders, academics, engineers, even a group of art conservators now wielding tools of destruction rather than preservation. "How did you—" "Dr. Aaron's atmospheric disruptor plan worked," Joran interrupted, ducking as an energy blast struck nearby. "It bought us time to organize something resembling a resistance. We've been targeting Draknir transports and small patrols, trying to keep evacuation routes clear. How many ships have escaped? Lyra asked urgently. 29 confirmed launches, all fully loaded. Another 6 are prepping for departure from the secondary spaceports. Dr. Aaron peered over the barricade. And the Draknir fleet? Are they still allowing evacuees to leave the system? Joran's expression darkened. For now. But our long-range sensors detected another wave of ships dropping out of hyperspace. Massive ones. Reinforcements, Lyra breathed. They're committing significant resources to ensure Cirilla Prime falls. Which means we need to accelerate the evacuation, Joran agreed. The command center has been relocated to the deep archives beneath the Citadel. We should get you there, both of you. Another series of explosions rocked the area. Closer this time. The Draknir were advancing methodically, using their superior firepower to overcome the desperate Cerulean resistance. We need to move, Joran urged, signaling to his fighters. We've rigged the buildings along this corridor with more improvised explosives. They'll buy us some time. They retreated in groups, covering each other's withdrawal with surprisingly effective tactics for scholars who had become guerrilla fighters overnight. Lyra found herself running through streets she had walked peacefully for decades, now transformed into a war zone. The acrid smell of energy weapons and burning knowledge archives stung her nostrils, a visceral reminder of all they were losing. As they approached the Citadel, the ancient heart of Luminara, the devastation grew more pronounced. The Draknir had concentrated their bombardment on centers of Cerulean culture and knowledge, as if determined to erase not just the population, but their entire civilization from memory. The Citadel itself remained standing, though its iconic crystal dome had shattered, raining prismatic shards across the plaza below. Cerulean defenders had established a perimeter, using the Citadel's naturally defensible position to hold back Draknir ground forces, while evacuation ships loaded at the adjacent spaceport. Joran led them through a concealed entrance, down spiral stairs that descended deep beneath the Citadel's foundations. The passage opened into the vast chamber of the Deep Archives, a repository of Cirilla Prime's most essential knowledge, now converted into a last-ditch command center. Counselor Varen met them at the entrance, his formal robes exchanged for practical attire, though he maintained the dignified bearing that had often frustrated Lyra during council sessions. "Ambassador," he acknowledged with a slight bow. "It is good to see you alive. When we lost contact..." "We were captured attempting to transmit a clarification to Earth," Lyra explained. "Did any of our signals get through? Have we received any response?" Varen gestured toward the communication station, where technicians worked frantically at jury-rigged equipment. "We've detected increased activity in the outer system, vessels dropping out of hyperspace, but we cannot confirm their origin or intent." "What of the atmospheric disruptors?" Dr. Aaron asked. "Are they still functioning?" 3 remain operational, Varen replied. "They've created a partial shield over the spaceport area, interfering with Draknir targeting systems enough to allow evacuation ships to launch." Lyra studied the tactical displays, showing the Draknir positions throughout Luminara. They were closing in on the Citadel from all directions, establishing a siege that would inevitably tighten until the last Cerulean stronghold fell. "How many more ships?" she asked quietly. 4, Joran answered. "After that, we've evacuated everyone we can reach. There are undoubtedly survivors in outlying areas, but..." The unspoken reality hung in the air. Those unable to reach the evacuation zones would be left behind when the last ships departed. "And us?" Lyra looked around at the command center staff, the final defenders of a dying world. Varen straightened his spine. "The last transport has been reserved for essential personnel, those with knowledge and skills critical to preserving Cerulean culture." His gaze moved deliberately from Lyra to Dr. Aaron and back. "You are both on that manifest." "And you, Counselor?" Lyra asked, though she already knew the answer. "I will remain with the defensive force," Varen said simply. Someone must ensure the final ships depart safely. Before Lyra could respond, an alarm sounded from the sensor station. A technician called out urgently. Multiple hyperspace signatures detected. Massive energy readings. The Draknir reinforcements, Joran said grimly. No, the technician countered, her voice rising with a mixture of confusion and hope. These signatures don't match Draknir configurations. They're different. Lyra rushed to the console, studying the readings herself. The energy patterns were indeed unfamiliar, neither Cerilan nor Draknir. A cold suspicion formed in her mind. Incoming transmission, another technician announced. It's breaking through the Draknir jamming field. Put it through, Lyra ordered. The main display flickered, then resolved into the image of a human face, stern, weathered, clad in what was unmistakably a military uniform adorned with insignia Lyra didn't recognize. This is Admiral Helena Reeves of the Earth Defense Fleet, to any surviving Cerilan authorities. We have received your distress transmissions and are moving to engage the Draknir forces in your system. Please acknowledge and advise on your current situation. A wave of emotions crashed through the command center. Hope, disbelief, suspicion. Lyra stepped forward, activating the response channel. Admiral Reeves, this is Ambassador Lyra Naven. We received a partial transmission earlier, suggesting Earth forces were inbound to deal with a threat. We feared you had misinterpreted our situation. The Admiral's expression remained impassive. There was indeed some initial confusion. Ambassador, your first transmission was garbled, and intelligence suggested the Draknir might be using your world as a staging area. Your second message clarified matters considerably. Relief flooded through Lyra. Their desperate transmission from the communications array had reached Earth after all. What is your situation, Ambassador? Admiral Reeves prompted. Lyra quickly summarized their desperate circumstances: the ongoing evacuation, the Draknir siege of the Citadel, the imminent fall of Cyrilla Prime's last stronghold. Understood, the Admiral replied. We are engaging the Draknir fleet at the system's edge, but their numbers are substantial. They clearly committed significant resources to this operation. She paused, consulting something off-screen. We're detecting 4 Cerilan vessels preparing for launch from your position. What is your evacuation timeline? Joran stepped forward. Final launches scheduled within the hour. Admiral, after that? He shrugged expressively. Then we'll give you that hour. Ambassador. Admiral Reeves's voice hardened. My battle group will create a corridor for your evacuation ships. Get your people out. We'll handle the Draknir. The transmission ended, leaving stunned silence in the command center. They came, Dr. Aaron said wonderingly. The Deathworlders actually came to help. Not all Deathworlders are alike, Lyra replied, a faint smile touching her lips, despite the dire circumstances. It seems humans maintain distinctions that the Draknir abandoned long ago. The moment of hope was shattered by a massive explosion that shook the deep archives, sending cascades of dust raining from the ancient ceiling. Draknir ground forces have breached the Citadel's outer defenses, reported a security officer. They'll reach the archive entrance within 20 minutes. Varen turned to Joran. Begin loading the final transports immediately. Priority personnel first, then remaining defenders as space permits. What about the atmospheric disruptors? Lyra asked. If they fall, the Draknir will have clear shots at our launching ships. We've automated the remaining stations, Dr. Aaron explained. They'll continue functioning until the power cells deplete or the Draknir destroy them, hopefully long enough for the ships to clear the atmosphere. Another explosion, closer this time, emphasized the urgency of their situation. Go, Ambassador, Varen urged. Your knowledge of Earth and human customs may be crucial for the survivors. You must lead what remains of our people. Lyra hesitated, torn between duty to the evacuees and the desire to stand with the final defenders. The decision was made for her when Joran gripped her arm firmly. "He's right, Lyra," the captain said, using her given name for the first time in their long association. "Some battles are fought so that others can escape to fight another day. This is one of those times." Reluctantly, Lyra nodded. "Prepare the transports. I'll join the evacuees shortly." As Joran moved to comply, she turned to Dr. Aaron. "Would you begin coordinating the knowledge archives? Ensure the essential cultural databases are secured for transfer." Once they had gone, Lyra turned back to Varen. "You never approved of my diplomatic approach, Counselor." "I thought you too willing to engage with Deathworlders," he acknowledged. "Too eager to bring their influence to Cyrilla Prime." A rueful smile crossed his face. "It seems I owe you an apology, Ambassador. Without your human connections, we would be facing annihilation alone." "We may still be facing annihilation," Lyra pointed out. "Earth's intervention comes late, and the Draknir are already on our doorstep." Varen nodded gravely. "Then we must ensure it was not in vain." He gestured to the remaining defenders. "Prepare final positions. We hold until the last ship launches, not a moment less." As the defenders moved to their assignments, Varen turned back to Lyra. "When you reach the refugee fleet, tell them Cyrilla Prime stood until the end, that we did not abandon our principles, even in our darkest hour." Lyra clasped his forearm in the traditional gesture of respect between equals, a courtesy Varen had rarely extended to her in council sessions. "I will tell them of your courage, Counselor, and when we rebuild, we will remember." Another explosion rocked the archives, this one powerful enough to crack one of the ancient support columns. Alarms blared as emergency systems engaged. "That's your cue, Ambassador," Varen said, drawing a ceremonial blade that looked incongruous in his scholarly hands. "The future of Cyrilla awaits you. We'll ensure you have time to reach it." With a final nod of respect, Lyra turned and hurried toward the rear exit that would lead to the spaceport. Behind her, Varen organized the defenders into a last stand that would become legend among the Cerulean survivors, a moment when scholars and peacekeepers embraced the necessity of violence to preserve what they held most dear. The spaceport was organized chaos, the final evacuees boarding in priority order, as Joran's fighters maintained a perimeter against the advancing Draknir forces. Overhead, the sky flashed with distant explosions as Earth's battle group engaged the Draknir fleet in orbit. Lyra moved through the embarkation area, ensuring the knowledge archives were properly secured aboard the lead transport. Dr. Aaron supervised the loading of specialized equipment, the seeds of what would become a new Cerulean society, if they survived. "Final checks complete on transports 1 through 3, reported a harried flight controller. Transport 4 still loading essential personnel." "What's our timeline?" Lyra asked, eyeing the horizon where Draknir assault craft could be seen approaching. 15 minutes to final launch," the controller replied, "assuming the perimeter holds." A sudden roar overhead drew all eyes upward. A massive ship, clearly neither Cerulean nor Draknir, descended through the atmosphere. Its hull scorched from battle, but its weapon systems very much active. As they watched, it unleashed a barrage against the approaching Draknir craft, obliterating them in seconds. "Earth vessel," Dr. Aaron identified, shading his eyes against the glare. "They're providing close air support." The human ship settled into a holding pattern above the spaceport, its weapons trained outward. A communication channel opened on all frequencies. "Cerulean Evacuation Command. This is Captain Rodriguez of the EDF Interceptor Valiant. Admiral Reeves sends her compliments and ordered us to ensure your final transports get clear. Suggest you expedite departure. The situation in orbit is fluid." Lyra activated her communicator. "Captain Rodriguez, this is Ambassador Navan. We're eternally grateful for your assistance. Final launches are preparing now." "Understood, Ambassador. Be advised we're detecting a Draknir command vessel Inbound to your position. Recommend immediate evacuation. The warning sent a new wave of urgency through the embarkation teams. Loading procedures that would normally take hours were compressed into minutes as the last essential personnel boarded the final transport. Lyra stood at the foot of the boarding ramp, counting heads against the manifest. "Where's Joran?" she demanded, noting the captain's absence. "Still at the perimeter," a security officer reported. He insisted on commanding the rear guard personally. Cursing under her breath, Lyra activated her communicator again. "Captain Tal, report to the final transport immediately." "That's an order." Static answered her. Then Joran's voice, breathless and punctuated by weapons fire. "Bit busy at the moment, Ambassador. The Draknir broke through the North Quadrant. We're falling back in stages. We launch in 5 minutes. Joran, with or without you." "Then it will likely be without me," he replied, his tone grimly matter-of-fact. "Someone needs to trigger the final charges to cover your departure." Before Lyra could protest, Dr. Aaron touched her arm. "The archives are secured. Ambassador, we should board." The distant thunder of Draknir weapons grew louder, and the ground trembled beneath fresh explosions. The Earth vessel overhead continued its protective pattern, intercepting Draknir aircraft that ventured too close. But even its formidable weaponry couldn't stop the ground assault converging on the spaceport. 2 minutes to launch, the flight controller announced tensely. "All personnel, board immediately." Lyra made her decision. "Dr. Aaron, take command of the evacuation. Ensure all ships launch safely, and rendezvous with the Earth fleet in orbit." Aaron's eyes widened in understanding. "Ambassador, no. Your place is with the evacuees." "My place is wherever I can best serve our people," Lyra countered. "Right now, that means ensuring this final transport escapes." She pressed her authorization codes into his hand. "The survivors will need your knowledge to rebuild. Doctor, I'm just a diplomat whose world is gone." Before he could object further, Lyra turned and sprinted toward the perimeter, ignoring his calls to return. The boarding ramp began to rise behind her as the final transport prepared for launch. She found Joran and his fighters at an improvised barricade, exchanging fire with Draknir troops advancing from 3 directions. The captain's face was streaked with blood and soot, but his aim remained steady as he fired his repurposed weapon at the approaching enemy. "Ambassador!" he exclaimed as she slid into cover beside him. "What in the name of the Twin Suns are you doing here?" "Ensuring our people escape," she replied, accepting a weapon from one of the fighters. "Someone needs to trigger those charges, and someone needs to get you to the transport." Joran laughed despite the dire circumstances. "And you think that someone is you? No offense, Ambassador, but your combat training consisted of ceremonial honor guard reviews." "Yet here I am," she replied, firing awkwardly but effectively at a Draknir soldier who ventured too close to their position. "And I'm a quick study." Above them, the first of the final transports lifted off, its engines straining against gravity as it clawed its way toward space. The Earth vessel adjusted its position, providing covering fire against Draknir anti-aircraft emplacements that had been established on surrounding rooftops. "One away," Joran noted, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. 3 more to go." The second transport rose moments later, followed almost immediately by the third. The Draknir intensified their assault, sensing their prey escaping. "They're getting desperate," Lyra observed, as enemy fire increased in both volume and in accuracy. "Good," Joran replied grimly. "Desperate enemies make mistakes." He checked his tactical display. "Final transport launches in 60 seconds. We need to fall back to the secondary position and trigger the charges." Lyra nodded, helping to organize the fighters' retreat. They moved in practiced pairs, covering each other as they withdrew toward the final defensive line, a hastily reinforced maintenance building at the edge of the landing field. Inside, the detonator for the explosive charges planted throughout the surrounding area waited, ready to create a wall of destruction between the Draknir and the launching transport. They had almost reached the building when a massive energy blast struck the ground before them, throwing Lyra and Joran forward through the doorway, while collapsing the entrance behind them, cutting off the remaining fighters. Dazed, Lyra pulled herself to her feet, ears ringing from the explosion. "Joran!" The captain lay a few meters away, his leg pinned beneath a fallen support beam. Blood pooled beneath him, but he was conscious, grimacing in pain as he tried to free himself. "The others?" he asked through gritted teeth. Lyra shook her head, glancing at the collapsed entrance. Trapped outside. Maybe worse. A quick check of her communicator confirmed what she already feared. The detonation had damaged their link to the perimeter teams. They were on their own. The final transport's engines ignited with a roar that penetrated even the thick walls of the maintenance building. 30 seconds to launch, if the schedule held. "The charges," Joran gasped, gesturing to a simple control panel on the far wall. "Manual detonation sequence. You'll need my authorization code, Terran 7 Epsilon 9. Lyra moved to the panel, entering the code with shaking fingers. The screen illuminated, displaying a simple countdown sequence and an activation button. Outside, the whine of Draknir weapons intensified as they concentrated fire on the struggling transport. The Earth vessel responded with its own barrage, but it was clear they couldn't hold off the enemy forever. "How long after detonation before the charges blow?" Lyra asked, her finger hovering over the activation button. Joran's laugh was tinged with pain. "About 2 seconds. Not enough time to get clear, if that's what you're wondering." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "There must be a delay option, a remote trigger." This was a last resort setup. "Ambassador," Joran interrupted gently, "designed to ensure the charges couldn't be disabled by the enemy. A failed deadly system." The implications settled heavily on Lyra's shoulders. Whoever triggered the charges wouldn't survive the resulting explosion. Through a crack in the wall, she could see the final transport struggling to rise, its shields flickering under concentrated Draknir fire. Without the distraction of the charges, it might not escape the atmosphere. "Go," Joran urged, reading her expression. "There's a maintenance tunnel under the eastern floor panel. It leads to an emergency bunker. You might survive there." Lyra looked from the panel to Joran's trapped form and back again. In that moment, she understood what Varen and the other defenders had accepted, that sometimes survival meant ensuring others lived, even at the cost of one's own life. "The charges need to be triggered now, while the transport is still vulnerable," she said quietly. "And you can't reach the panel." Joran's eyes widened as he realized her intent. "Lyra, no!" "My entire career was built on the principle that words matter," she continued, a strange calm settling over her. "That diplomacy could prevent conflicts like this. I was wrong. Joran, sometimes actions speak louder." The captain struggled against the beam pinning him, but succeeded only in causing himself more pain. "You're not a soldier, Ambassador. This isn't your duty." "Today, we're all soldiers," Lyra replied, her finger steady on the activation button. "And duty is what we make it." Outside, the Draknir forces had nearly reached the maintenance building. The transport hovered precariously, its engines straining, shields weakening under the assault. "Tell them," Joran began, then faltered. "Tell them we stood until the end." Lyra smiled sadly. "They'll know, Captain. History will remember what happened here." She took a deep breath, her diplomatic training providing one final service, the composure to face death with dignity. "For Cirilla Prime." She pressed the button. The countdown began, a simple numeric display showing 2 seconds that stretched into eternity. In those final moments, Lyra Navan, ambassador of a dying world, found a measure of peace. She had done what she could for her people. The rest would be up to the survivors. The last thing she saw before the world dissolved into light and heat was the final transport breaking free of the atmosphere, ascending toward the stars where Earth's battle group waited to escort it to safety. Then the charges detonated, and the spaceport disappeared in a conflagration that consumed Draknir and Sarillons alike, a funeral pyre for the last defenders of a world that valued knowledge above all else. Yet, in its final hours, learned the necessity of sacrifice. The refugee convoy traveled in solemn procession through the neutral lanes of deep space, escorted by Earth vessels still bearing the scars of their battle with the Draknir fleet, aboard the lead transport. Dr. Aaron Merrick stood at the viewport, watching the distant stars and contemplating all that had been lost. Behind him, the survivors of Syrilla Prime worked to establish new routines, scholars cataloging saved knowledge, engineers adapting ship systems for long-term habitation, children learning to play in corridors never designed for such purpose. Life continued, as it must. Dr. Aaron, a young aide, approached hesitantly. "The Earth liaison requests your presence in the communications hub. A transmission is coming through from Admiral Reeves." Aaron nodded, turning away from the viewport with reluctance. As the designated leader of the Sarillan refugees, a position he had neither sought nor desired, such summons had become frequent. The humans had proven surprisingly helpful, providing escort, supplies, and technical assistance to the battered convoy. Yet their aid came with unspoken expectations, diplomatic considerations that Aaron, a physicist thrust into leadership, struggled to navigate. The communications hub buzzed with activity as technicians maintained contact between the scattered ships of the refugee fleet. On the main screen, Admiral Reeves's weathered face appeared, her expression as inscrutable as ever. "Dr. Aaron," she acknowledged with a respectful nod. "I trust the convoy is proceeding without incident?" "As well as can be expected, Admiral," Aaron replied. "Your escorts have been most vigilant. We've detected no pursuit." "The Draknir took significant losses at Syrilla Prime," Reeves said, "both from our battle group and from the final detonation at the spaceport. They'll regroup eventually. But for now, you should have clear passage to the rendezvous point." Aaron's throat tightened at the mention of the spaceport. The survival of the final transport had come at incalculable cost. Ambassador Lyra, Captain Joren, and dozens of volunteers who had held the perimeter until the end. Their sacrifice had already passed into legend among the survivors, a foundation myth for whatever new society the Sarillons would build from the ashes of their world. "We've received the coordinates for this rendezvous," Aaron said, redirecting the conversation. "But I confess some confusion about its purpose. We had assumed we would seek asylum in one of the neutral systems." Admiral Reeves's expression softened slightly. "That remains an option, Doctor. But Earth Command has authorized me to present an alternative." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "We have a colony world in the Valar sector, New Horizon. It was established a decade ago but remains sparsely populated. There is ample room for your people, and the climate is not dissimilar to Syrilla Prime." Aaron blinked in surprise. "You're offering us a home?" "We're offering you a place to rebuild," Reeves clarified. "Under Earth protection, but with full autonomy to maintain your culture and traditions. The Draknir would think twice before challenging an Earth protectorate." The implications were staggering. Rather than scattered refugees dependent on the uncertain charity of neutral systems, the Sarillan people could remain together, preserving what remained of their civilization under the shield of Earth's military might. "This is most generous, Admiral," Aaron said cautiously, "but unexpected. Our intelligence suggested Earth's policy was one of limited engagement with non-Deathworld species." A ghost of a smile touched Reeves's lips. "Policies evolve, Doctor. The Draknir have become increasingly aggressive in recent years. Your world may not be the last to face their attention." She paused again, and when she continued, her tone was more personal. And I knew Ambassador Navan, briefly, during a diplomatic exchange some years ago. She spoke passionately about the potential for cooperation between our peoples. Consider this an honor to her memory. Emotion threatened to overwhelm Aaron's carefully maintained composure. He had spent so many years focused on theoretical physics, believing politics and diplomacy to be Lyra's domain. Now, he found himself thrust into her role, responsible for decisions that would shape the future of their surviving population. "I will need to consult with the other ship leaders," he said finally. "This is not a decision I can make unilaterally." "Of course," Reeves acknowledged. "We'll reach the rendezvous point in 3 standard days. You can provide your answer then." Her expression grew more serious. "But be aware, Doctor, the galaxy has taken note of what happened at Syrilla Prime. The Draknir made a statement with their attack. How we respond will send an equally powerful message." The transmission ended, leaving Aaron to contemplate this unexpected development. He turned to find Counselor Alara, one of the few council members to escape, standing in the doorway. Her expression thoughtful. "You heard?" he asked. "Enough," she replied, moving to stand beside him. "Earth offers sanctuary, but at what cost? We would become a military asset in their strategic calculations." "We're already a strategic factor," Aaron pointed out. "The Draknir destroyed our world to make a point about Deathworlder influence in this sector. Running to the neutral systems won't change that." Alara sighed, showing her age in a way protocol would never have permitted on Syrilla Prime. "For millennia, we prided ourselves on remaining above the conflicts that consumed other species. Now, we find ourselves at the center of one. Perhaps that was our mistake," Aaron suggested quietly. "Believing we could remain apart from the galaxy's struggles indefinitely. Ambassador Navan understood this before any of us. It's why she fostered the relationship with Earth in the first place. And now we must decide whether to embrace that relationship fully," Alara mused. "To align ourselves with Deathworlders against other Deathworlders." Aaron turned back to the viewport, where the Earth escorts flanked the refugee convoy like protective sentinels. "I'm beginning to think the term Deathworlder obscures more than it illuminates, Counselor. There are those who bring death, like the Draknir, and there are those who fight to preserve life, even at the cost of their own." He thought of Lyra's final message, transmitted from the transport before it launched. A simple statement that had now been shared throughout the refugee fleet. "Remember what we were, honor what we lost, but become what we must." "Call the ship leaders together," he decided. "We have 3 days to determine the future of our people. Let's use them wisely." The refugee convoy arrived at the designated rendezvous coordinates on the 3rd day, dropping out of hyperspace into an unremarkable system dominated by a yellow dwarf star. A larger Earth fleet awaited them, a show of force that simultaneously reassured and unsettled the Cyrillan survivors. In the conference room of the lead transport, Dr. Aaron stood before the assembled ship leaders, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. For 2 days, they had debated Earth's offer, weighing the benefits of protection against the cost of alignment, the preservation of their people against the transformation of their identity. "We have reached a consensus," Aaron announced, his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. "We will accept Earth's offer of settlement on New Horizon, with conditions to preserve our cultural autonomy and civilian governance." A murmur ran through the assembled leaders. Not disagreement, but the solemn acknowledgement of a momentous decision. What remained of Syrilla Prime would continue under the protection of beings they had once studied from a distance as fascinating but potentially dangerous curiosities. As the meeting concluded, Aaron returned to his now familiar position at the viewport. The stars looked different here, the constellations unrecognizable compared to Syrilla Prime's night sky. Yet among them lay their future, a new beginning purchased with unimaginable sacrifice. A young aide approached, carrying a data tablet, Doctor, we've completed the preliminary cultural inventory. Would you like to review it? Arin accepted the tablet, scrolling through the catalog of knowledge, art, and heritage that had been salvaged from their dying world. So much lost, yet so much preserved, a foundation upon which to build anew. Thank you, he said, returning the tablet. Ensure this is shared with all ships. Every survivor should know what we've saved and what we must reconstruct from memory. As the aide departed, Arin noticed a small object tucked into a recessed shelf beside the viewport, a crystalline shard that caught the light in a familiar way. Reaching for it, he recognized a fragment of Sci-Fi Prime's shattered central dome, somehow salvaged during the evacuation. He held it up, watching as it refracted the unfamiliar starlight into familiar rainbow patterns. In its facets, he saw reflections of what had been lost: the knowledge towers of Luminara, the Scholars' Promenade, the peaceful existence that had defined their civilization for millennia. But he also saw something new, a resilience born of necessity, a determination forged in fire. The Ceruleans had been scholars, who became reluctant warriors in their final hours. Now they would be something else entirely: survivors, adapting to a galaxy that had proven far more dangerous than their peaceful philosophy had acknowledged. "We remember what we were," he murmured, echoing Lyra's final message. "We honor what we lost." Beyond the viewport, an Earth vessel moved into position alongside the Cerulean transport. Its design was utilitarian, focused on function rather than beauty. The creation of a species evolved to survive rather than contemplate. Yet, in its protective presence, Arin found a strange comfort. "And we become what we must," he concluded, carefully returning the crystal shard to its place. The convoy began to move, escorted by their Deathworlder allies toward an uncertain future, one where the peaceful scholars of Sci-Fi Prime would rebuild under the protection of a warrior species they had once studied from a safe distance. The galaxy would watch this unlikely alliance with interest, wondering what might emerge from the crucible of destruction and survival. Somewhere in the void behind them lay the ruins of Sci-Fi Prime, a monument to what happens when a civilization believes itself apart from conflict, when it trusts in distant help that arrives too late or not at all. And somewhere ahead lay New Horizon, not the world they would have chosen, but the one they had been given, a place to remember, to honor, and to become. The stars stretched into streaks of light as the convoy entered hyperspace, carrying the last children of Sci-Fi Prime toward their destiny. No longer merely observers of the galaxy's struggles, but participants in its future. The Deathworlders had indeed come, not to help as they had hoped, but to annihilate as they had feared. Yet, in the aftermath, different Deathworlders had extended a hand of protection, proving that even in a universe of terrible strength and violence, there remained the possibility of alliance, of sanctuary, of renewal. It was not the ending Ambassador Lyra Navan had envisioned when she sent her desperate plea to the stars. But perhaps, Dr. Arin reflected, as the hyperspace corridor enveloped them, it was the beginning she would have chosen, had she lived to see it. A future where her people continued, changed but unbroken, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them among the stars.